Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Gail Burke. And we have as our guest this evening, Jerry Parisella, who's running for, what is your fifth term as a representative for the city of Beverly.
Correct, yes.
It is just the city of Beverly, right?
All the city of Beverly, yes.
Yep, nothing else. Okay.
Nothing else.
Well, suppose you were a real estate agent and you were talking to some corporate CEO and you're going to try to convince him to come to Beverly. What are the three big things that he would be interested in or would attract him to Beverly?
Well, everyone says real estate, real estate, real estate, right? And location, location, location. So, I mean, I think Beverly's a great place to live. Every school has been rebuilt in the city of Beverly. We have a brand spanking new middle school, which you were involved in. Great high school. All the elementary schools are fairly new. The kids' test scores do really well, so you get a lot of folks that are looking for good schools. I think is probably the number one question that realtors are asked. Access to transportation. We have 5 commuter rail stops in Beverly, more than just about any city in the Commonwealth, so folks can just either drive or walk to the commuter rail station and work in Boston. Access to 128, you even get the corporate types who use the Beverly Airport, the transportation situation. And I just think the quality of life in Beverly, we've got beaches, we got a lot happening downtown Beverly with the Cabot and the Larkham Theater and a lot of good restaurants. It's just a great place to live and work. And so, I think it's a pretty easy sell for folks.
Suppose 3 years later after he moved in, he came to you and said, I think we ought to fix some problems. What do you think the top 3 problems you would like to fix in Beverly?
I mean, obviously people are worried about traffic. I think that's probably an indication of the growth of the city and how things are going well. Everybody wants their potholes fixed, the sidewalks fixed. There's money being invested in that. It's cost a lot of money to fix a road. So, but I think those are probably just those typical, situations where, it's funny because when I campaign and talk to people, a lot of times they ask me about city-specific issues, even though I'm not the mayor, but they may ask me about a sidewalk or a road or, can we get this tree trimmed and stuff like that. So I think those neighborhood issues, might come up.
Well, what are these kinds of issues can you from the state level fix, or ones you see from the state level that need to be addressed and need some sort of state involvement?
Well, as far as talking about the schools earlier, Beverly gets about $8 million from the state for Chapter 70, which is the school funding. Gets about $5.5 million for fixing up our parks and paying for the police and fire and things like that. So just making sure Beverly gets its fair share of money. The Beverly Middle School costs about $106 million, and about $50 million came from the state. So, helping the city pay for that. And even smaller projects that I try to get money to help the city pay for, whether it's $20,000 for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial that's going at Ellis Square, or $100,000 for the carriage house at Lynch Park. So some of those projects that the city may not have all the money to help pay for, but improves the quality of life for folks in Beverly, having a place for events at the carriage house at Lynch Park. We're honoring our veterans with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. We've got $200,000 for the new police station, to design the police station. So things like that the state can get involved in, financially. The state helped the city pay for the Brimble Ave improvements, $5 million. There's also a couple of new projects coming up in the next year or two to improve intersections by the Beverly-Salem Bridge, by Henry's, and by Beverly Golf and Tennis, the McKay and Ball Street intersection. Mm-hmm. So those are projects that are funded by the state, or at least a good portion of it. So hopefully that's what I can do, is try to bring back some resources from the state to the city of Beverly.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry, I don't know if the legislature gets involved in this, but there's a problem over at Harvard. Harvard's being sued by some Asian American students because of racial preferences against them. Does the legislature get involved in anything like that? And what do these what do these students do to prevent this from being an ongoing problem? And it has been for quite a while. Apparently, affirmative action works for some minorities, but not for others. And it appears as though the Asian kids have to get much higher scores to get into Harvard than, say, for instance, blacks or other minorities. And what part can the legislature play to help this not happen?
I mean, we don't specifically get into that, like Harvard, whether or not they're following the law, because as you mentioned, there's a trial that's actually starting this week as
Right.
we're taping. But obviously, we have anti-discrimination laws in Massachusetts that prohibit discrimination based on race, gender, sexual identity, religion, things like that. So we do have the anti-discrimination laws, and actually, we added veteran status to that anti-discrimination law under a bill that I sponsored a couple of years ago. So even veteran status is now a protected class. But as far as like the specifics of the Harvard situation and getting involved in that, it's in litigation now. So we'll have to see how the courts rule on it.
But the legislature doesn't really get involved in it?
Well, if it's a court case, I mean, we can't get involved,
Right.
Okay. But I mean, I'd be curious to see how that plays out. Each side seems to be pretty adamant in their position, so I don't know how it's ultimately going to play out.
Okay.
There's
I'm
a
just curious about
bit
it.
of a flap going on a little bit north of us over affordable housing. It's going back and forth a couple of different ways. And one of the concerns I think that you as a real estate agent selling this city to a company would want to talk about is, can the people that work here that you're going to bring in, can they afford to live here? And I have gotten a feeling over the years that if you want to live in Beverly, you got to work someplace else to earn the salaries to pay for it. And at the other half is that if you work here in this vibrant community downtown, you got to live someplace else because that isn't going to pay enough. There is the 40B characteristics that some corporations can use, and we've had a discussion before about Cummings. When they put up their apartment, they kicked into a fund, and that doesn't provide housing directly. So there is a gap I see between the technical affordable housing and the real affordable housing, because the interest rates are going up, the price of the houses are going to go up. And how do you attract somebody to this area when they look at, well, how far do you have to commute to get to work?
I would say, like you asked me about some of the issues and concerns, I think affordability of housing is maybe right up there on the top.
Yeah.
No question about it. Even like the units that are being built above, next to the depot garage, 50-something units, and there's about 16 that are affordable. Even those are about $1,600 a month for the affordable units, $1,800 for a two-bedroom, I think. And that's the affordable, so it's expensive to live in the North Shore. I mean, it's really a problem throughout eastern Massachusetts now. There's no question about it. Beverly does have its own affordable housing zoning ordinance that requires 12% of multifamilies to be affordable if they're new construction. But like you said, they can put into a fund instead of doing that. At the state level, we did pass a huge housing bond bill over $1.5 billion. The idea is to try to create 10,000 units of affordable housing throughout the state within the next decade. So that's just starting to get cranking. And I think it's those sort of public-private partnerships like by the train station, because they were used state money, federal money, some local money, and the private developer all working together to provide those units. So that's something that the state is we're taking a hard look at, because it like you said, you're a firefighter, teacher in Beverly. Can you afford to live in the own city that you work at? It's getting very, very expensive, no question about it.
What is the percentage of homelessness in Beverly?
I don't know the percentage of homelessness in Beverly, but I mean, talking to like Sue Gabriel at Beverly Bootstrap, she said about 9% of the population uses Bootstraps, so, the food pantry and stuff like that. So it's a higher number than I thought, for sure. Homelessness, no question, is something that has to be addressed, and we're trying to get everybody out of the hotels. I think that's a horrible way to take care of homeless folk, putting them in a hotel. And a lot of folks have been moved out of
In
the
Danvers
hotels,
especially,
in Danvers. I mean, they had like over 300,
Yeah.
and it's expensive for the community because their kids are going to school there and so forth. So there's been a lot of money and effort put into trying to get them permanent housing. We're fortunate in Beverly to have groups like Family Promise that take it on as a nonprofit. We've got the River House in Beverly. We've got the Pleasant Street Apartments, which are 30 units for formerly homeless veterans. So I think Beverly as a community is doing its part to try to tackle the homelessness issue. It's hard to say exactly what the percentage is because some people just don't want to report, or they may have issues where they just don't want to get the help that you're trying to give them, unfortunately.
Do they have a boarding house down by the railroad station? That block where the restaurant was, the Italian restaurant. Wasn't there a bar or something with?
Yeah, Thrill Sports Bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's owned by Windover, so there's nothing in there now.
Nothing.
I think they're
Okay.
looking to try to do something. There's like a historical restriction on that property, so they can't
right.
tear it down
Yeah.
at this point, and I think it's just full of rats and pigeons and stuff right now. But there is on Broadway also another like a rooming house that also serves veterans and others.
Yeah.
And now I'll ask you the perennial question. What's happening with McDonald's, the old McDonald's down by the harbor? Do you have any updates on that?
Or what's happening with the harbor in general, because
Yeah.
that's part of the stumbling block to making something happen down in
Yeah.
that area.
Right. So it was considered what they call a designated port area. So that property was, I think the whole reason that project was tied up for a while and with the Kinseys appealing and so forth was because there was a requirement that it have some sort of use that was like a maritime use. It had to be water dependent. Well, the state was willing to change that designation a few years ago, so they did make that change. So I think that will give the city more options. Now it's just trying to find somebody to bid on that property.
Will it happen in your lifetime? Or maybe I
hope
should
so.
say my lifetime.
We hear about that a lot. I mean, it's too bad. You go to a place like Newburyport, and they got
know
a
it.
vibrant downtown, and it'd be great to have that property, utilized by a restaurant or someplace that people can really go downtown and the waterfront. And,
Yeah,
so,
the major
yeah.
problem is there's no parking around
Yeah.
it. You get into the zoning, every table has got to have so many parking spaces outside, and that area, it's only good for a drive-through. That's why McDonald's works so well there. But after that, it gets to be a real challenge, and I'm not sure where we can get the guidance to come up with a better solution.
people want parking, especially in a place like that where it's, there's some parking under the bridge, but it's not a ton. So, I mean,
No,
it's a challenge.
And you're on two major highways, Rantoul Street and Cabot Street come to that intersection. And you're onto the bridge, and that's a crowded area that you don't have any on-street parking, and getting in and out of there is a challenge. So it's going to be a difficult thing. But when
The
you
Anger
start-
Pub does really well, and they're right down there too. So
yeah, but
it's
they're on the other
interesting.
side of the
Yeah.
street, and they
Yeah.
got access
Yeah.
up the hill.
Right. But I'm saying that I think
Yeah.
that it has potential, but you're right about the parking, no question about it. But I mean, it does show that, people will go down there, and I think
Oh
the
yeah,
Anchor
the
does
area
well.
will attract people.
Yeah.
And it's just how do you get there and get back out of there? And that gets to one of my other concerns is you mentioned earlier that, Beverly's got 5 railroad stations in town. And I know I drive by the parking lot at Montserrat, and that's pretty full every day. And since the state made the change, or MBTA made the change to cut the fees at the new parking garage down to $2 a day, that has a major impact on more people using it, and it eases up on the parking around town. But I guess the other question is, what other kinds of transportation are around? Because you're looking at like the old Ford dealership that's being converted into apartments. Well, that's nice. They've got one parking space per house, okay, per apartment, that's okay. But if you wanted to go and get some groceries, you either have to have a car, or you're not going to schlep a couple of bags of groceries all the way from over by the Cummings Center to there. The city needs, I think, to have some sort of jitney system where you can get transportation locally, and I don't see that much of it. That's another issue I think that the state, I think, could contribute to.
Yeah, I mean, they do have that Cape Ann Shopper Shuttle, but that doesn't run very often. And then the MBTA has the 451 bus that runs through Beverly, but that's also sort of intermittent. And I think it's just not used a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge, is trying to convince the MBTA to provide increased service for the bus, but they're saying, hey, it's not used that much by folks. So that's the challenge. What's the cost benefit?
Yeah.
And I think people are hopping on an Uber now, and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, there again, that's a different class of people that can afford to say, oh, come and get me.
Yeah. Well, I used to live in Gloucester, and the CADA buses were used extensively. I mean, they really were. But when I moved to Beverly, every once in a while I'd see one. But you're right,
Yeah, I mean, we do have the CADA, like you said, the Shopper Shuttle, people call it, but I just don't think it's used a lot, unfortunately.
Is there any kind of other public transportation that could be started or utilized from some other city?
I mean, that's I think I actually talked to the CADA folks about trying to increase, this in the city of Beverly, and just the argument was, I think that's only like 25 cents or 50 cents to ride it, and so they're not getting any money really for it. It's just the cost. Yeah. It's a pretty significant subsidy, and that's the issue, is how do we pay for it and subsidize it, because there's just not great ridership.
Well, I think this comes down to the problem of everybody wants to move into the city, and the cities want to grow and grow and grow, and we can see this on Rantoul Street, and with Cherry Hill, and then Dunham Road. So they're all competing for more and more business. And those places are big enough that they can have their own parking lot. But I'm back to the issue again of, can you work there and live in the city? And is there any way to get there from here? And I think this is a major disconnect, that I think this is where I think there needs to be more of an integrated solution where the state gets involved. And it's not just something the city can solve on its own, because, like you say, the CADA system, well, they're more than just Beverly. And Beverly is just one issue. And if Beverly isn't paying, why bother? So how do we get the state to integrate the system so that the trains, and again, it'd be nice if you could take a bus from wherever you lived and get dropped off at the train station and then go into Boston. I don't think that can happen.
It's expensive, to have these MBTA buses run. I mean, it's just like the ride for folks who are disabled folks, that they do provide door-to-door service, but that's like $100 million service per year, and they probably get back 5 to 10% of that, from the fees.
Yeah, it's only, I think it's $4 or something.
Yeah, it's $4. It depends on where you are. But so that's the issue. The MBTA perennially is fighting its budget crunch, and so we're asking them to increase the service downtown Beverly, and they're just looking at the numbers saying it just doesn't support it. So I think that's the challenge, whether or not we could do something creatively, like give vouchers for Uber. That's something that we talked about with the ride. Mm-hmm. So folks who have a disability and it's documented, instead of having a special van come, maybe they can give them a voucher for an Uber. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than having that special ride service. So that's something that we've been looking at, and they have actually started doing that. So it's a challenge, no question about it. I think Beverly is one of those cities where it's not like Somerville or Cambridge where there's a vast
Yeah.
bus system running through the city. It's more sporadic. So a lot of people are dependent on their car.
And then we're back to the issue you brought up earlier, that this hypothetical CEO is going to come to you and say the traffic's impossible around town. And you look at the traffic come off 128, and already they're backing up on 62. This is 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning trying to get off 128. And we're going to end up with the same situation shortly down here at Brimble Avenue where the Whole Foods Center is. That's going to get overloaded very quickly once Whole Foods opens up. So it seems to be a problem that, yeah, we want to be a big city, but we don't have all the facilities and amenities to make it really attractive. And one of the other issues that comes up when you start to mention the budget with the MBTA, I noticed an article in the paper that they had a tremendous saving this year because they were able to outsource a lot of their work. And then the Pachenko law is coming due for, I guess it's on a hold or exactly what the deal is, but it's coming up for reconsideration. Do we reinforce it and go back to using union help, or can we continue to outsource, or can we outsource even more since they seem to have saved a bunch of money?
Yeah, I mean, so there was done like a few years ago as part of the budget, we did ease up the Pacheco law to allow the MBTA to look at that. And it was for a 3-year period, so that 3-year period is coming up. But the governor hasn't asked us to reauthorize that authority, so I'm not sure how that's all going to play out. I think those contracts are still in effect that were done for the so-called outsourcing. So they're still in force and effect. But I think, whether or not we'll do that again, I'm not sure. I mean, the governor was the one who asked us to do it 3 years ago, and we did. And at this point, he hasn't asked us to do it again, so we'll have to take a look and see how that plays out.
Well, can the legislature decide, hey, that worked well, to save us a bunch of money, we want to do it again? Do you really need the governor to ask you, or can
No, but I think like there was part of this whole reform with the MBTA, creating the Fiscal Management Control Board, which is now has oversight of the MBTA. I'd like to look at the numbers and see, did they really save the MBTA money? Did it work? And so that's something that I think we're going to take a hard look at next year.
I want to switch a little bit to the election, the upcoming election. There was some kerfuffle about this booklet that is put out by the state, I guess, Secretary of State.
Yeah.
And on the back page, some people were complaining that it seemed like it was free advertising for Bill Galvin because it went into some of the positive things that he's done since he's been in office. Does anybody have oversight on these booklets before they're sent out to everyone in the Commonwealth? Or does the Secretary of State just do it and that's it? Does anyone look at it and make sure everything is kosher? Or
I mean, he under statute he has that's his job. He's the chief elections officer for the state, so
right.
He produces that booklet and he sends it out to everybody. Whether or not he's pumping up his own office, I'm not sure. I mean, Tim Cahill got in trouble a few years ago as treasurer when he ran a lot of ads featuring him on TV right before the election. So I know I did hear that complaint.
Well, it says at the top of the page, if you have been the victim of investment fraud, Secretary Galvin's office might be able to help. And then he goes on to see, cites different situations and how they have helped.
Yeah, I mean, he does also have oversight over our securities law in Massachusetts. So, I mean, that is part of his office duties is to investigate, securities issues. So whether or not he's fluffing himself up, I'm not sure. But, that is part of his duties.
Looks like he is.
Yeah.
So what can people do about it? Or if it's pointed out to somebody in the legislature, can they look into it? Or do you just let it go? Or what do you do?
I think one of his opponents had filed a complaint with the Ethics Commission, so they
Yeah.
would take a look at it and see to make sure, if he has. He's got lawyers on staff. Whether or not he had folks looking
sure.
at it ahead of time, it would be smart of him to do that. So I don't know if he did or
Since
not.
you bring up the question of oversight, in the federal Congress, they have oversight over a whole bunches of things, and they have committees that review it. Does the state legislature work the same way? Do you have committees that are have oversight over different operations?
It's probably not the same. There's only one committee in the legislature. It's called Post Audit and Oversight that has subpoena power. So they're the one committee that has that subpoena power. But every committee does have jurisdiction over certain areas of the state government. So for example, like every bill that gets filed, the clerk looks at it and says, okay, this should go to this committee. So let's say it's a veterans issue.
No,
the
I'm
veterans
thinking more
committee.
about the kerfuffle we're having right now with the union issues of the Pachenko law, or the issues relative to the state police. And the first two questions on the ballot really are related to union issues. The question, I guess, is anybody looking into is this going too far? Should these regulations be cut back? Or do you have to wait, like you said, till the governor makes a proposal?
No, I mean, you don't have to wait for the government. There's always oversight hearings where we'll call in folks, from different agencies, and you can talk to them about, what's going on. Like the Public Safety Committee has oversight over the state police, and I know they had some hearings after all the hoopla about the state police.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting down to the wire. We have about a minute and a half left,
Okay.
but I have to ask you this one question. And I think I ask you every time you come on. Where are we with voter ID to make sure that no illegals are voting in our elections? Are we anyplace?
I don't think that happens.
It does happen. It's been documented, but
Yeah, I mean, when you register to vote, you have to show an ID, so that does require that.
Yeah.
when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, the IDs that you show can be almost anything. And that's where a lot of it's happening.
Yeah.
I'm not saying a lot of it's happening in Massachusetts, but it's happening nationwide.
Yeah.
So
I
what
think it's
can we
very,
do
very,
about it?
very minuscule amount of voter fraud. I mean, I think there's been a lot of court cases that when states try to pass these voter ID laws, they get shot down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the
Well,
issue.
I don't know many states that have been shot down. I know it's been tried in a lot of places.
California's had
Well,
North
California.
Yeah, that's the other thing. If some of these things are recommended by California, that's every reason they need to vote them
Yeah,
down.
well.
But anyway, Jerry, we want to thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
I wish you luck on the campaign.
Yeah, you think you'll win?
I hope so.
So, yeah.
Well, you don't have an opponent, I guess, right?
I
Yes,
do.
he does, yeah.
I
Does he
do.
have?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
interviewed
I'm
you.
sorry. That's right. You did.
Yeah, we got him all
Sorry.
set up for the 23rd, I think.
That's
it's-
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Donato, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, Donato.
Sorry about that.
I'm not keeping up with things. Thank you very much for coming, Jerry.
Thank you.
And thank the audience for watching. We'll try to keep you up to date on what's going on. And election is coming up on November 6th, so stay tuned and educate yourself about who's running and what the issues are. Good night.